A man stands in a pool of light in front of a room of suddenly silent strangers. Stop me if you've heard this one before. They watch him, waiting to hear what he will say next. Seriously, stop me. All right, you had your chance. About the man, we can assume certain things. His physical appearance is apparent. He seems to be in reasonably good health and could pass in most situations as average. His first and probably only language is English, unless he has memorized these words phonetically, which he assures the strangers he has not. By his accent, they can place him as an American, and from this designation, they can make whatever associative assumptions that might follow. As an American stage actor, they can assume that he is not well off. Being an actor of any nationality, he is to some extent an exhibitionist, a person needing a certain amount of attention from others in order to maintain his self-worth. He appears thoughtful and intelligent, but this could be due to direction or some other artful deception. About the man's private or inward character, the strangers can actually know very little. He is, after all, an actor. His relationship with the truth, whatever that may be, is suspect and highly charged. He is paid, by and large, to imitate. As an actor, he would not be allowed through the gates of Plato's Republic. In medieval times, he would not have earned a consecrated grave. There are things the strangers can assume about the man, but not a great deal that they can know. Now, this is true, of course, only during the course of the event. After the event is over, the man will be standing outside somewhere, and the strangers can question and probe and size him up as they would any other stranger. The event masks the man for the strangers in the room. When the event is over, the mask is gone. About the strangers, we know very little. Chance and advertising have led them here. Chance and advertising lead them most places. We can assume certain things. They drink clean water. They eat 3 or more times a day. They fly in airplanes. They go to the theater. They own more than one pair of shoes. Their homes are not threatened by tsunamis. Their children will not die of starvation. They strive to fill their leisure time with fantasy and beauty. And they have come to this room today to witness this event. They hope to be entertained. That hope is now flickering. The man smiles at the strangers. The strangers smile back, desperately hoping that the next hour will pass quickly and enjoyably. Some of the strangers do not smile back. This is entirely up to them. They are sitting in the dark, and they have, after all, paid to be here. Most of them. Among the strangers in the room, there are people not strangers to the man at all, of course. His profession is not a large one, and there are more than likely some of his professional colleagues and friends in the room passing themselves off as strangers. Some of these colleagues could be quite famous, much more famous than the man speaking, and though he can't help but privately resent their fame and income, he's happy to see them here today. He smiles into the darkness. Others of his friends are here as well, other actors and people of the theater. The way that many friendships in the theater are maintained is by attending each other's shows and then drinking and lying to each other afterwards, late into the night. It's known in the trade as obligatory theater. I see your show, you see my show, and in this way, a robust, if entirely false and insular economy is simulated. You gotta fill those seats. It's also possible that members of the man's family are here with us today. Not familiar or comfortable with the conventions or purpose of his profession, they sit stiffly, alternately flushed with pride and deep physical embarrassment. That's my boy. The man hopes that the strangers and his family and friends and colleagues approve of him and will say nice things about him later when the event is done. He hopes that the strangers will praise him when they are at home or out with their friends. He has no rational reason to believe that this will happen, but he hopes it fervently. See, without the approval and praise of the strangers, the man will not be able to continue to do this for very much longer. He'll have to go home and wait for another opportunity to stand in a different light in front of a different group of strangers and speak different words into the silence. He does not want to do that. Not at all. Although the man is the only one who has prepared for the event, the strangers are the ones actually in charge. He smiles again. He wishes he had shaved. The man has prepared for the event by saying these very words over and over, aloud and to himself, in various empty rooms over the last several weeks. Another man listened and gave suggestions on how to speak certain lines, words to be emphasized, thoughts to be underlined, things like that. He's been told where to stand and when to move when he speaks the words. These clothes were chosen for him to wear. They are not his own. His breath is his own, his blood beating in his ears, and of course his manic thoughts dancing in and out of his consciousness. Thoughts having nothing to do with the words he is speaking or the event he is engaged in. These are all his. Everything else, up to and including the words he speaks, is borrowed and put aside when the event is done. The memorized words buzz in the man's head as he smiles at the strangers. He has memorized them all in the order that they are to be spoken, and he hopes that he will speak them all in the correct order and not forget to speak any of them. If he speaks them all in the correct order without skipping over any of them, then he's done a good job, and the words will have the desired effect upon the strangers. He does not exactly know what the desired effect is, but it's really not his job to know. His job is to say the words in the proper order without leaving any of them out in front of the strangers, and thus earn their approval and praise. He very much wants to do a good job. At this point in the event, the accepted convention is that the strangers will begin to learn more about the man as he continues to speak. They'll learn of a childhood trauma, perhaps, or hear of a striking incident in the man's life, or be regaled by the story of how he faced a challenging situation and how that situation changed him irrevocably, making him the man he is today. There are many accepted conventions that govern the event. The man now informs the strangers that few of them will be honored here today. The playwright, the writer of these words, after a somewhat tense negotiation in the rehearsal room several days ago, has agreed to allow the man 20 seconds to break from the script and speak to the audience directly. Listen, I know. This is some sort of art thing, and if you want to leave, it's fine. This is it. I'm just going to be standing here talking the whole time. That's the whole thing. Nothing happens, nothing changes, nothing gets revealed at all. It's just all these, there's no plot, there's no character, you know? It's just all these fucking words about nothing. I don't know what the hell this is. And it's a shame, you know? It really is. I'm good. I can act. I'm really pretty good. But this is some sort of meta thing or art thing or whatever. Anyway, I'm sorry. And you know, you can leave. Or stay, and we'll get through this. It's only an hour, less now. But you know, it's not my fault. You gotta work, right? Anyway, sorry. Back to it. Those words, of course, were also entirely memorized and rehearsed. They're mostly there to give the man a chance to do something a little different during the course of the event. They also serve as sort of a release valve built into the event to keep the strangers' attention, and perhaps encourage some of them, those not enjoying or on a very base level even participating in the event, to leave. Seriously, the man tells the strangers, life is short. Don't spend a second of it sitting in the dark, forced to hold your tongue, listening to someone babble on about things that have nothing to do with you. All right. The technician hits a button as the man steps towards the strangers, and the lighting changes dramatically. This is a shortcut to a cognitive response, a telegraph to the strangers saying that something that's happened is now over and something new has now begun. It's a very effective prompt for the strangers, suggesting movement along a narrative arc. It is an especially effective and useful prompt if, in fact, nothing at all in essence has changed. The technician, by pressing a button, often has a far greater effect upon the strangers than the man, despite all his hours of preparation, can ever hope to equal. The technician, aware of this disparity, watches the man through lidded eyes, unimpressed, waiting to flick another switch. Although the man and the technician need each other to execute the event, it is not a close relationship. The strangers, by custom, have by and large remained mostly silent up to this point. Up to the moment the man appeared in the light before them, they spoke freely. After the event is over, they will resume their natural habit of speaking whenever a thought occurs to them. But while the man in the light speaks, the convention is that they will remain mute. Now, this must certainly madden some of them, those with strong opinions Other strangers, and quite possibly most of the man's colleagues, will use this time as an opportunity to rest, to reflect on past conversations and rehearse those soon to come. Others still will literally rest. The darkness, the hypnotic drone of the man's voice, the willed inability to speak, these things force some of the strangers into a dream state that they will welcome with gratitude. It is, after all, a hard life, a hard time to be awake, alert, and alive. When one can rest, one must. Now, the man now encourages the strangers he tells them that he will be in no way offended or thrown or disturbed in any way if they choose to take this time to sleep. And for those on the borderline, struggling between fitful, blinking alertness and slumber, the man now sings a lullaby to coax them towards the joys of waking. Rock-a-bye, baby, on the treetops. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come baby, cradle and all. All right. The man will attempt to keep his voice down for the remainder of the event so as not to wake the sleeping strangers. He requests that those strangers still awake try not to disturb their sleeping companions with explosive laughter or sudden gasps of disbelief and surprise. We will all of us endeavor to keep the event civil and calm. Now, there are, among the strangers and family and friends and colleagues still awake, and possibly among those now sleeping, professional observers of the event. Their job, as odd or perhaps even odder than the job of the man, is to watch the man speak the words, and then, after the event is over, write down words of their own. Words of explanation, condemnation, and praise. They will print or post their opinions of the event. Strangers not in the room now, strangers out there walking around innocently or laden with guilt, will read the opinions of the professional observers, and from those printed opinions they will make the decision as to whether they wish to come into the room at a later date and watch the man speak the very words that you are hearing right now. If the professional observer's words are praise, this room will be packed tightly with expectant and self-satisfied strangers for weeks to come. If the observer's words are condemnation or dismissal, then soon the technician and the man will be alone in the room, and they will just go home. Speaking the words alone before the strangers have come in is rehearsal and part of the job. Speaking the words alone in the room after the strangers have been invited in is pathetic and will begin to border on disturbed behavior if it continues for too long. The professional observers, therefore, have a great deal of power over the fortunes of the technician and the man and the writer of the words the man speaks, and all others involved in the enterprise of the event. These professional observers could be morons. They could be unqualified, incompetent, failed, bitter, soulless hacks. They could be notorious drunks and hypocrites. But the strangers not in the room now will read and trust their words regardless. The man would like to recognize how well they're all looking. And inquire if they've lost a few pounds, done something different with your hair, something, am I right? The man would like to take a moment to thank them most deeply for spending their valuable time on this modest little event. He smiles again, winningly. The man now pauses for 17 seconds. It feels like much longer than that to the strangers, but the man counted out the seconds to himself to ensure accuracy. Time behaves erratically during the course of the event. An hour can fly by, while 3 minutes can pass at an excruciating pace. Another accepted convention of the event is that the strangers will avoid looking at their wristwatches while the man speaks. Or if they do, they will do so surreptitiously, waiting for a moment when the man is looking away or not facing them. The man now encourages the strangers to look at their wristwatches if they want to, and by way of assuring them, he looks at his own. 19 minutes in, 44 more to go. Outside the room, time runs along in its normal fashion. Friends and family of the strangers and of the man exist now in normal time outside of the room. They are working, walking, talking, sleeping, dreaming, betraying, laughing, weeping, all as normal. Perhaps they are thinking of us now. The greater possibility, of course, is that they are not. We overestimate our importance to others here in the 21st century, as they overestimate their importance to us. The truth is that we all of us, are expendable. Whether here in this room or outside of these walls, walking about in the world, we all will stop suddenly one day, to our great surprise, not to continue. Our story's over, our life song sung. And the more terrible truth is that when this unimaginable event occurs, the world will not pause, not for a second. No presses will stop. Those we know and love will continue, as we will when others that we know and love drop and fall to the wayside. Night will come, morning will follow, days will pass, and the dead will recede back into the darkness, becoming only memories in the minds of the living. Perhaps it is that we've become crueler here in the 21st century. Perhaps there are just more of us and too little time in our days for commemoration and memory. Perhaps we are evolving past emotion. The reported increase in childhood autism could be the leading edge of this trend. Or perhaps it has just always been this way, and we here in this room are no different from the first generation of our species, starving and insistently surviving on some baking African shore, leaving our dead in sand dunes behind us, crouching there, staring out at the impossible sea. The man does not know. He merely speaks his memorized words. The man now tells a joke in an attempt to lighten the darkening mood. It is professional practice to open with a joke and to establish a relaxed and friendly relationship with the strangers, but it's far too late for that now, so this will have to do. Two older couples are having dinner at the house of one of the couples. Doesn't matter which one. After dinner, the wives retire to the kitchen and the husbands sit down in the den. This is the kind of joke where people have dens. One old man says to the other old man, "We had the nicest dinner the other night at this new restaurant. The food was excellent, the service was wonderful, very friendly, and it was quite reasonable. You should go." And the second old man says, "Well, what was the name of the restaurant?" And the first old man says, "I've forgotten." And he thinks for a second. And then he asks the second old man, "What's the name of that flower? It's red, has thorns, lovers give it to one another." And the second old man says, "A rose?" First old man says, "Yes, thank you." And with that, he turns and shouts into the kitchen, "Rose, what was the name of that restaurant we went to the other night?" A good joke. This is a joke about aging, about forgetting, about the dim, treacherous corridor we will all find ourselves wandering down someday, if it is we live a long life. Walking stiff-legged down that ever-darkening hallway, leaving memory and everything else behind. The joke is not on the old man or his wife. It is on us. And we ruefully acknowledge that fact, recognizing ourselves in those terrible moments of blankness, of striding purposefully into a room only to stand stock still, momentarily bewildered. What did I come in here for? And beyond the personal recognition, there is acknowledgement. There is perhaps also a larger acknowledgement of what has become a national, if not a global amnesia. The stubborn, maddening inability to remember how things stood just a few decades ago. Who was on whose side? Who was the enemy? What was all that about anyway? Too much to remember, perhaps. Too many distractions these days, perhaps. But again and again, we find ourselves metaphorically turning into the kitchen these days and shouting, "Rose, what was the name of that war we fought a while ago? What was the name of that tyrant or dictator, bad guy we beat? You know the one with a hat?" And Rose doesn't remember either, shouts back, "What?" And we shout back something confusing the metaphorical Rose, whose hearing is going, to tell the truth. And she shouts something that we don't quite catch, and so on throughout the metaphorical night. It is a joke about loss and infirmity, about helplessness in the face of a changing world. It's best not to analyze or explain jokes. Just to have the laugh in the dark and move on. The man now speaks of his physical gestures. He's been told not to put his hands in his pockets like this. He's been told not to slouch. He's been told to keep a good wide base. He knows himself without being told that he should not imitate a flamingo or a reptile of some kind while speaking the words. That's just common sense. That would be silly. Most of his gestures are his own natural gestures, even though he must now repeat them at the same moment during the event every time the event occurs. For example, in rehearsal one day, while delivering the rose joke, the man turned upstage and cupped his hand under his chin, like he did a moment ago, like he did just now. Someone watching the man rehearse the event that day may have said something like, "Oh yeah, good, keep that." So now the man must do it the same way each time. What was originally an organic impulse on the man's part has now become a responsibility, a part of the job. In a strange way, the man finds himself imitating himself, night after night, trying to maintain the illusion of spontaneity and ease. It's a very strange position to be in. For example, something as seemingly random and silly as was actually rehearsed, refined, and agreed upon before the strangers were allowed into the room. Watch. See? Exactly the same. It's a very strange job. A chair is thrust out onto the stage by an unseen stagehand. There are now possibilities. The man can sit. He can straddle the chair and lean forward menacingly. He can stand behind the chair and rest his hand on the chair back and appear thoughtful. He can smash the chair into pieces on the floor. He can balance the chair on his chin, if he were the kind of man who knew how to balance chairs on his chin. Other chairs may appear similar or different to the one now on stage. Or perhaps a table, a stove, or an ironing board. That you, Paul? With one chair, many doors have opened. The man regards the chair while the strangers regard the man regarding the chair. The technician waits silently, implacably. The chair reliably maintains its essential chairness, retaining all of its chair-like properties. The strangers, if they like, can consider what is in front of them as a tableau, the sudden creation of a striking or dramatic situation. Or they can just see a man in a chair. All of these things are entirely up to them. The man wonders. Not really, of course, but he professionally gives the impression of wondering. If all of these choices available to us here in the 21st century are necessarily a good thing. These choices, these constant mounting decisions must weigh upon the strangers if they ever find a spare moment to reflect upon them. As free men and women operating in a free society, they can choose where to live, what to study, what to read, what to eat, what team to cheer on, what party to vote for, or not to vote at all, what to have for dessert, or not to have dessert at all. Their clothes, their friends, their facial hair, all these things are entirely up to them. They are free to choose, to decide, with no meaningful coercion whatsoever. They are in charge, not only here in this room, but out there as well. Out in the widening world. The essential matters, of course, are decided by experts. Government officials, scientists, and the leading men and women of industry work day and night to ensure our welfare and continued prosperity. We can all rest easy and sleep at night knowing that these dedicated, if inaccessible individuals have shouldered the great weight of Western civilization and are pulling it forward like a reluctant ox up a mountain path, or a battleship mired in the mud, or any enormous thing that can be pulled. The man thinks of teeth. Here in the 21st century, we can choose to whiten our teeth, or have them all replaced, or file the incisors down to fangs. The most outlandish imaginable choice is there, laid out on the groaning board of freedom. And like Roman emperors, we point and click, and it is so. It truly is a remarkable time. The choices of entertainment alone appear inexhaustible. Films open every weekend. Television boasts 1,000 channels running 24 hours a day. Video games are invented at dizzying speeds and played feverishly in dark rooms against distant opponents. Books are still published and sold for those who quaintly prefer their culture printed and bound. Musical acts tour. Comedians make pithy observations on stages vast and small. Acrobatic troupes have become artful and play stadiums to mesmerized crowds. My God, one could spend one's life sitting in the dark watching events designed purely for their pleasure and distraction. One could be doing that right now. Instead of listening to a man in the light speaking memorized words. 28 minutes in, 35 more to go, just so you know. Yes, choices, decisions. And, of course, there is the choice to do nothing at all. To just sit back and relax as events unfold before one. This is a choice not available to the man at the moment, nor to the unseen stagehand or the silent technician. They have a job to do. But when the event is over, they too can indulge in this choice, the choice of leisure, of withdrawal, just sitting quietly with one's thoughts, or with no discernible thought at all, content to let the world whir away without you. Like a yogi who has realized the radiant emptiness, or an infant in a stroller who is staring wide-eyed at the moving, changing world around her. It is good sometimes, when one can, to stop trying to make sense of everything. Just wait for your cue and say the next line. Unless, of course, one is alone and responsible for providing one's own cues. This must be what it's like to be a widower or a shut-in of some kind. That you, Pa? No response. No Pa. There's a freedom, of course, to being alone, of having no obligation to any other living thing. Your decision on any matter is final. The chair goes there. I shall never shave again. And I'm painting that wall red. Finally free from all negotiation, seduction, bullying, and calculation. Alone, as we all shall one day be, as indeed it seems sometimes we already are. Even in crowds, you can sense an isolation these days. Everyone plugged in their own private soundtrack, or talking in full voice to someone not there. We are together in the streets, but not by choice, it seems. Everyone hurrying through the day's tasks, staring fixedly at flashing lights and elevator doors, willing time to pass a little faster, standing exasperated in sudden lines to form without warning in front of you. The agony of choosing the wrong checkout line, the time wasted, frozen, as the other lines around you clear. Nervously fingering your chosen purchases, keeping them separate from other people's choices, avoiding all eye contact, standing there forever as the line inches forward. Surely there's a better way to do this, a faster way to do this. The strangers, like all civilized people in the 21st century, are obsessed with speed. They have a saying, brilliant in its brevity, if baffling in its application. Time is money. Whatever time may actually be, it is certainly not money. This is like saying history is commerce, space is property. Surely there's more to it than that. The technician hits a button as the man steps stage right. Stage right is the man's right. House right is the stranger's right. We all share, theoretically, human rights. Even the technician crouching in the back, hunched over his magic board. The technician is free to wear whatever he wants to wear during the event, while the man must wear his chosen costume. It's traditional for the technician to wear black, like an assassin, or a priest from some dark and long-established religion. This in case he has to run up on stage for some reason, or lurk backstage during the event. If he wore a big Hawaiian shirt or a sombrero or something, it would distract. Is it? Now, what were we talking about? The man pretends to wonder. Oh, yes, he pretends to remember. Sayings. There are many sayings available to us here in the 21st century. Bite-sized bits of knowledge, ready-made statements requiring no expense of original thought. Easy to swallow and parrot back. You get what you pay for. Shit happens. This one strikes the man as particularly crude and overly negative. Of course shit happens, but it's not like it rains down from the sky. It happens because people perform it. No great mystery there. In God we trust. Not really, of course, but it is a saying. God bless America. More of a plea than a saying, I suppose. And after endless repetition, these phrases, these sayings, they lose whatever original meaning they once had. Like an old record, the grooves of which have been worn smooth by the needle's long embrace. The man thinks of records. pressed discs of vinyl, where once we trapped music, to be released only by a diamond-tipped needle. Sounds like something out of a fairy tale, but once it was true. The man now thinks back on all those things now gone, vanished, receding back into the darkness of memory. Rotary phones, black and white televisions, communism, television stations ending their broadcasting day, the image of an American flag waving on the screen, and then snow and static throughout the long night. From these words, the strangers can assume an approximate age for the man. But then again, these may not be his thoughts, and stage makeup can add or subtract decades when properly applied. The man pretends to remember the act of actually, manually dialing a telephone. The index finger inserted into the little slot, the flick of the wrist, the long wait as the cylinder returned, clicking to its starting place. These gestures were also rehearsed, refined, and agreed upon by all those involved in crafting the event. And that same telephone, ringing and not being answered by a machine or a satellite or whatever answers phones these days. Just a steady ring, content to go on forever if the person calling were willing to wait. And then after 10 or so rings, the people from this previous time, this time before the present time, the people from the past would return the handset to the squat contraption that was their telephone, cradle it there, and then without worry or concern say, "They're not home!" In those distant days, people could not be home. They could at times not be available to take your call, and somehow life went on. Imagine. Here in the 21st century, we are always available for anything. Our recorded voices apologize for us if we are not instantly available to answer someone's call. I can't take your call right now, but if you please leave your name and number, I'll be happy to. Empty words, of course. Usually, we are not sorry that we can't take your call. Most of the time, we are actively dodging your call. We have more important things to do than to take your call. We all of us have more important things to do with our time than to spend it conversing with one another. We type words to each other now all day and all night, back and forth, and this is called keeping in touch. The man thinks of what the word touch actually means. We are touching each other, we tell each other, silently and from great distances. It does not feel like touching. It feels more like communicating with the home planet, all of us scattered and flung out across the vast cosmos, hurtling by the second, farther and farther from where we began, from each other and all that we once knew. Each of us sealed in our own private capsules, staring into screens, typing frantically, trying not to panic from the isolation and claustrophobia. Coordinates lost, energy supply running low. This is an automatic out-of-office reply. Love, Dad. This is not touching. Time was, many, many years ago, long before the man or any of the gathered strangers were born, the only way to know what was happening outside of your home was to go to some central, previously designated place and listen to other people talk. People would stand and speak and listen to each other for hours in all types of weather. Imagine. The only way to share new information in those days, or to keep the collective memory alive, or to just know what the hell was going on, was to speak of things to each other. The listening and the speaking being the only thing keeping the past from disappearing back into the darkness. A modern church service is some sort of vestigial remnant of this ancient practice, I suppose. The gathering, the speaking, the vague air of something important going on. But, of course, the news shared at church is no longer current. It's like listening to someone speak of some battle lost in the Franco-Prussian War. Yes, it happened, you think, but what am I supposed to practically do with this information? It all happened so long ago. Modern sporting events are probably the closest thing that we have to what those ancient gatherings must have been. The sense of community, the irrational hatred for an arbitrary enemy, and of course, the need to physically be there, sitting or standing with others in order to experience the event. Now, you can watch it remotely in your home, alone on your couch, or in a bar crowded with strangers, but it's not the same. You need to breathe the same air as the players and jostle and brush up against the other spectators in order to really catch it. It's the difference between watching something and being a part of something. Political rallies are a close approximation, but they're more like the embalmed corpse of an ancestor, not an actual descendant. They may resemble the original, but there's no blood beating there. Speech, applause. Speech, applause. Balloons. The script is too rigid to allow for actual communion. Now, there are other practices and events that tap our primal need to gather. The man cannot think of any other examples off the top of his head. The man walks to the chair, which is the cue for the technician to hit yet another button. The man wonders how it's going back there for the technician. "How's it going?" he jocularly shouts out. The technician stares back at the man, thinking his dark thoughts, fingers twitching. The man can feel the stare of the technician always. The man knows the technician's power. At any moment, the technician can hit a switch and plunge the man back into darkness, ending the event suddenly. He can hit another switch, and Frank Sinatra's voice can blare out of the speakers, drowning out the man, deafening the strangers. So much power for such a silent figure. Although it is an established convention of the event that the technician will remain silent throughout, it is more than just convention that keeps the technician from speaking. Conventionally, everyone in the room is supposed to actively ignore the existence of the technician and treat his magical effects as some sort of natural occurrence. "Oh, look, light!" Well, of course, light. Naturally light. Sure, don't think about it. Light. The focus of the room should stay directed toward the man. That's why the strangers' seats are facing the way they are, and all the lighting instruments are pointing this way. Even referring to the technician in this manner and at this length is considered very bad form and can do nothing to advance the event. "How's it going back there?" The man pointlessly shouts out to the figure in black hidden behind the strangers. Much, much more than convention holds the technician's tongue. The technician cannot answer by the very nature of his role and the definition of his kind. He is a technician. If he speaks, if he answers the man at all, he will become an actor. His word, his smallest utterance, will transport him out of the shadows in which he operates and into the bright light and public scrutiny of the man's realm. It must be very tempting for the technician to do this. To speak, to transfigure. One wonders, what kind of a man would choose to become a stage technician? What kind of forces would so warp a person in this way that they would willingly sit in the back of a darkened room behind rows and rows of silent strangers watching the same thing night after night, hitting the buttons one at a time, again and again, the same buttons, the same little switches, huddled back there like some sort of unspeakable creature, crouching in the depths of a damp and sulphurous cave, rightfully ashamed to show its hideous face to the light of the righteous day. No? This is not a real exchange or challenge between the man and the technician, of course. The words are memorized, the pauses timed out. If the technician were to speak, he'd be fired. Not the technician's job to speak. That's the man's job. The technician's job is to sit and hit the buttons one by one. He's doing a very good job today. He is a professional. A strange, twisted little man, perhaps. A freakish little man with no friends or recognizable human emotion, perhaps. But no, no. The technician and the man are actually friends. Friendly, anyway. Colleagues. They are the only two besides the unseen stagehand who have to be here every day in order for the event to occur. They are compadres. They soldier on. And as the lights are hot on the man, and to give this next section a new look, the man takes off his jacket and hands it to the unseen stagehand. Keeping the stagehand unseen provides some mystery to the event, the man is told. A question hangs in the air. Male, female, young, old. This is important for some reason, the man was told, so now he passes that on to you. The man walks to the chair, which is the cue for the technician to hit. Already said that, didn't I? Memorized words buzz in the man's head. This pause was not timed out. Just getting more lost. This is still actually part of the script. No, sadly it's not. It actually is. How would we ever know? The playwright now informs the strangers through the mouth of the man that the only way to be absolutely certain whether this is a mistake made by the man or a diversion written by the playwright is for the strangers to buy a copy of the event after the event is over, available right out there in the lobby for a very reasonable price, or online at www.clancyproductions.com. Is nothing sacred? The man sits in the chair to indicate weariness, or perhaps resolve. The sitting man seems to have more to say, or his words at least seem to come from a deeper place of thought. Business matters, financial transactions, heart-to-heart talks are always conducted while seated. A standing man is a man of action and uncertainty, always ready to dart away or attack. A sitting man is a man of thought and purpose. The silent technician hits a button as the lights slowly pool around the man, the rest of the playing area gradually becoming shadowed and dark. This gathers the focus of the strangers and indicates that the man has something important to say. The act of unbuttoning his cuffs and rolling up his sleeves helps convey the desired impression of getting down to it. Literally, he rolls up his sleeves as though preparing for some actual work of purpose and consequence. Leaning forward slightly, elbows on knees, increases the gravity of the words. It is as though the man were now speaking from his heart. Expressive but controlled hand gestures lend an even greater air of import to the words. Someone who doesn't speak the language, a stranger who has wandered into the room by mistake, perhaps, seeing the man in this position, using these gestures, would have to assume that this is the crux of the matter, the heart of the event. By emphasizing certain syllables and taking a few well-judged pauses, the effect is unmistakable. The man now leans back in the chair and reflects back on his once promising career. He reflects on how apt the word promising is, and how few promises are kept in this world. The empty pedestrian promises of friends and lovers he has learned to discount automatically, of course, like any sensible person living in the 21st century. Dinner plans, a return phone call, vows of undying love, these are all understood to be provisional and subject to sudden and irreversible change. It is the larger, mostly unspoken promises that trouble him. Progress, that great historical tectonic force, that enormous thing that seemed to be inevitably paving a path towards a heaven on this earth, seems to have stalled, like an earth mover at an abandoned work site, its enormous claw still raised, rusting, as the earth below returns to weedy chaos. Again, the metaphor is not the man's, so. The idea of a civilization, of a society held together by something beyond and above merely pecuniary interests. Civilization working towards a sense of universal justice. A life lived in virtue and honor, being its own reward. These larger promises that when the man was young seemed to hang in the air, unquestioned, manifest, are no longer spoken of, let alone kept. What happened? Understand and remember that these are not the man's thoughts, only the memorized words that he is duty-bound to recite, but still, all the same, what happened? Something large and maybe unnameable, something perhaps too large for the net of language to catch and haul aboard, has changed. Recently. And either the change has occurred recently, abruptly, in the last 10 years or so, like an Arctic ice cap, disappearing over the course of a summer after floating unchanged for thousands of years, or the change occurred long ago, and it was such an immense and fundamental change that we are only now beginning to notice its effect. Like a distant star exploding, vanishing in an instant in an unimaginable rush of energy and noise, but we stay staring at its reflected light for millions of years before our instruments can detect and record its disappearance. What was it? What accounts for the nameless dread, the sense of unreality that clings to every innocent encounter, every public announcement and event? It is as though we are all play acting, aware of the artifice, but dutifully reciting the words expected of us, acting out the rituals of society and civilization, family and friendship. We hear the word freedom and we nod, not bothering anymore to even question what someone might mean by using such a word. Other people say war and sacrifice and God, and we wait to see how we are expected to react. Men and women on our television and computer screens lead us helpfully through this maze, and we are grateful for their guidance, parroting their words and opinions, hoping that no one questions us any further on these baffling matters. Late-night comics and satirists seem to be the only ones actually conversant with and willing to speak to the daily reality of most people. A mild, mostly benign schizophrenia is evident everywhere. Our collective memory drained like a swamp in the south of Iraq. Our ability to stay focused on one thing over the course of a few days severely impaired and finally destroyed by the buffering and battering of the constant, hourly, daily news flashes, the breaking news breaking down our doors of perception, the media barking at us like prison camp dogs, freezing us in place, terrified, afraid to move. The world has somehow transformed itself into a dark, chaotic nightmare that we cannot wake out of. Every age has had its terrors. Every generation has been convinced that it would be the last. Any cursory reading of history tells us that all golden ages were nickel-plated for those who toiled through them. But even so, this feels different. We have become somehow, deep down, unmoored. Do you feel this? The man asks the strangers directly. It's not a question for out there, of course, but here in a darkened room, with time off its usual track, sitting quietly with strangers and family and friends, listening and watching a man in the light speak memorized words, we can ask this. We can talk of this void, this darkness, the infinitesimal but seemingly growing gap between reality and our perception of it, our collective acceptance of artificial behavior and counterfeit words, the exhausting daily task of pretending not to notice what is right before our eyes. We smile at people we do not like. We applaud people we do not trust. We speak of community with strangers we have no wish to know. We plan for futures that we do not believe will ever actually occur, and we do all of this knowingly. We are very smart people here in the 21st century. We cannot plead ignorance if our case ever comes before some celestial court. We know who we are. We know what we're doing. And yet, if an angelic prosecutor ever asks, why? What will we say? Why didn't you stop? Why didn't you say something? Do something. Will we just shrug unconvincingly and stall for time by asking for a glass of holy water? We are like good actors in a very bad play, smoothing over implausible plot developments with our willed belief, our iron commitment to the script as received, ignoring the wild, sudden tonal shifts of our collective narrative. It's a black comedy, but now it's a tragedy, but now it's a farce. We gamely play on, spouting our lines, mechanically doing our gestures, ad-libbing like crazy as the set collapses around us. New characters appear out of nowhere and are suddenly playing the leading role, the hero, the villain, and we point and mutter, peas and carrots, in the background, trying to give the whole thing the feeling of a complete and sensible world. We stand here exhausted under the lights, secretly praying for the final curtain to fall, or at least for a quiet moment alone in the wings to gather our shattered thoughts. But no, the plot races on ahead of us, and we chase it doggedly, not bothering anymore to even try to make sense of the whole thing, just happy to get through an exchange without feeling baffled and foolish. We don't even know who we're playing to anymore. Who might be out there watching this incomprehensible, high-stakes game of charades? The old idea of the creator God, the great playwright or director in the sky, seems highly doubtful, what with the abject absurdity and inherent contradictions of the script. No sensible author wrote this. The idea of rows upon rows of our dead ancestors watching and judging our performance is morbidly comforting for some. But the man finds that all rather pointless in the end. A bunch of retired actors watching actors act? Well, they'll only say, well, I would have done that a bit differently. Or, in my day, you had to have the proper training in order to blah, blah, blah. We will receive no standing ovations from our deceased colleagues. Is it a science fiction experiment, and we are the white rats being studied? A pulsing blue cloud of intelligent gas watches intently from the third row, scribbling down notes with a tentacled claw, cackling in his alien glee at our monkey shines. Is there no one out there at all? An empty house out beyond the proscenium. Our heroic efforts and impassioned speeches witnessed and heard by none? Are we playing for each other? A closed rehearsal? No director, no playwright, no stage manager timing the entire event? No hidden technician making the thunder roll? Just us, making things up for each other? Histories, backstories, ancient feuds, and eternal truths, all fiction, all just springing out of our minds and mouths as we go along? This is closest to what it feels like sometimes, when you can't remember your line, you don't know what to say, and no one seems to notice. When a lead character, someone you've played all of your scenes with, suddenly dies in the middle of a speech, their central action left unresolved, leaving you to stumble on alone. It does not strike the man as a well-made play. And yet there are moments that may just be some kind of collaborative magic, or willed collective hallucination. They may mean nothing, the man knows. But there are moments of clarity and calm in the middle of the deafening chaos, when one can feel an enormous underlying strength, like the unknowable strength of the ocean supporting the swimmer's stroke. It is not love or any sense of final justice, or one feels connection. Just that. Connection to strangers, to people one does not know and will never know, and yet already does know. Knows fully in some inexplicable way. Moments of purpose and reassurance beyond anything one has any reason to expect. Things open, paths clear, the tangled knot solves itself in your fumbling fingers, and you are holding a string, straight and endless, one thing that connects to everything else, one thing that everything else hangs upon, perfectly, like an endless string of perfect pearls. These moments are rare. The man can't remember the last time he was struck by one and held in its gentle grip. But they do happen. They do happen. And they are, in fact, the only thing that keeps the man from falling into a life of despair. They do happen. Do they happen to you? The man asks the strangers directly. Am I speaking of some private, incommunicable event, or do you understand these words? The convention of the event keeps most of the strangers from answering the man. He must assume he is speaking nonsense. Or he must assume that there is complete understanding and agreement in the room. Either way, his assumptions are his privately, and they cannot be known or shared with the strangers. These are the conventions and the parameters of the event. And now that the event is drawing to a close, the man reaches for his jacket, provided by the still unseen stagehand. Thanks, Frankie. Frankie still could be either or any gender. The man realizes that he is nameless in the minds of the strangers. He doesn't actually realize this, of course. And yet, still, a name, a familiar designation, would so greatly and immediately bond the man to the strangers that one must be invented and invoked, if only for the John is obvious and pedestrian. Bob is untrustworthy. Bob. Call me Bob. Hey, Bob. No. Ishmael. Pretentious and too many obvious resonances. Walter. Why not Walter? Sufficiently out of fashion, yet still faintly respectable. Probably not too many Walters in the house. Anybody out there, Walter? Call me Walter. I am Walter. When you think of me after the event is over, if you think of me at all, think of me as Walter. When Walter said, or you know what Walter I think was meaning to convey was, etc. Walter. Walter balances the chair on his chin. Walter produces a coin and makes it disappear. Walter produces an object out of thin air. It appears to be a cane. For you, young lady. Walter now informs the strangers that they have been sitting together for 61 minutes, and there are just 2 minutes remaining before they can return to the wider world. Walter asks for forgiveness and understanding now that the event is nearly done. A man can only do so much. A man on stage, alone, armed only with memorized words, can only hope to do so much. Walter is now almost finally done. The man is not Walter. The man is Dave. Hello. The words, the thoughts and ideas and sorrows and indictments that the man has expressed in the light in front of the strangers are not his. The words are not his. It has been his breath and his body that have delivered these words to the strangers. He has labored to do this job in front of the strangers, and that job is now almost finally done. He hopes that he has done a good job. He does not honestly know. It's a strange job. The technician hits the last button, his job done for the night, and the lights slowly fade on the man as he disappears, becoming only a memory in the minds of the strangers.